Ladies and gents, hello and welcome to another video. This is going to be a little different than usual because we're going to be unboxing two iPhones at the same time. We've got an iPhone 6 and an iPhone 6 Plus. These are supposed to both be running iOS 8, which is the version they shipped with when they launched in 2014. So let's get these opened up, see what kind of condition they're in, and hopefully we've got ourselves a pair of iPhones that have never been updated on iOS 8. Let's begin. Alright, so interestingly, we do have an iPhone 7 box. I do think there's an iPhone 6 inside based on the listing photos. Here we've got our 6 Plus, and it says it's a 128GB model. I don't remember buying that, but that would be really sweet if this is an iOS 8 128GB iPhone 6 Plus. Let's see if it has any power, and it does, but just to be safe, we're going to get this connected to power before we check out that iPhone 6. We'll set that on top of the 5Cs there. And let's see here. Looks like we do have an iPhone 6. And yes, it is also space gray. Let's see if this has any power, and it does as well. I am very surprised that both of these are turning on. The iPhone 6 Plus just vibrated, indicating that it is on. And there we go. This is definitely iOS 8. I can tell right away. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Let's wait for the 6 to boot up, and then I'm going to get these devices cleaned up, and I can already see a bunch of scratches here on the iPhone 6, and this one is also running iOS 8. That is great news. Okay, let me get these cleaned up and go through the setup screen, and then we'll talk about these iPhones. All right, so pretty big difference here in the display quality. You can see all the scratches and scuff marks there on the iPhone 6, while the 6 Plus is basically flawless. The only problem here on the 6 Plus, there's a little dent down there at the bottom, and the listing said that the frame was bent, and maybe it is a little bit. I can feel the glass kind of coming up. Oh, I guess right here. Yeah, there's a bend right there. That's a problem on the 6 and the 6 Plus. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But the frame is bent, and you can see the glass is basically exposing the internals of the iPhone there. Okay, so let me go through the setup here, and once we get to that home screen, we will get to enjoy both of these iPhones on their original version of iOS. All right, here we go. Moment of truth. What iOS version do we have? I already know it's 8, but still for the fun of it, we're going to click on Get Started. And the iPhone 6 ruined our transition there because it is taking its sweet time getting into the home screen. There we go. Here we have our iPhone 6 and 6 Plus. The iPhone 6 is being a little funky. I'm thinking this might have the dreaded baseband problem that the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus do have. But first things first, let's go into settings here, general and about, if this iPhone 6 will cooperate. And we're going to see just which version we have and how much storage each of these iPhones has. All right, so I went ahead and turned airplane mode on the iPhone 6 because I thought that was going to help. Maybe I'll turn Wi-Fi off as well. This thing is really showing a lot of lag and having some major slowdowns here. I would imagine it's baseband. Once we get into the about screen, we should be able to see if that is the problem. I'll tell you guys why here once we can get there. All right, here we go. And whoa, the iPhone 6 Plus is on 8.0 and it's a 128GB iPhone. That is actually insane. I'm not sure I've ever had a .0 iOS version like the original one on an iPhone, let alone a phone like this with the max storage. That is pretty freaking cool. Now, if we scroll down to modem firmware, this is where I thought we were going to have a problem. A lot of times, if these have what's called a baseband issue, the modem firmware will not display a number. It'll just be blank. But in this case, that iPhone 6 is displaying a number, so I suppose maybe it's something else going on with that device. So that's pretty cool to get not only the iPhone 6 on iOS 8, but the 6 Plus as well on 8.0, and it's a 128, so maxed out. This thing was definitely purchased at launch, and for some reason, whoever used it never updated it, not even a single time, to one of those little incremental updates. So a fabulous, fabulous device. And the only problem here is the sticker on the back. I got the other ones off, but this one is a little bit more stubborn. Gonna have to spend some time on that. And then of course, it's a real bummer that this thing is bent. Maybe this happened really early in the iPhone's life and the owner just said, you know what, forget it. We're not gonna use this anymore, and they bought a new one. So these phones came out in 2014 and they really changed the game for Apple and the iPhone lineup. The reason for that is because these were the first times that Apple increased the iPhone size. Up until this point, the iPhones had been this size or smaller. This size was standard with the iPhone 5, 5C, and 5S. And then obviously the iPhones before it were even smaller than this. So we got to jump here, not only look at the difference in the thickness of the phone, but the increase on the front side with that larger display was dramatic. Impressive on the 6, but then you pick up the 6 Plus and the entire screen is essentially larger than the iPhone 5C. So if we hold them like this, you can see the display behind there. That is pretty cool. And that was the first time that Apple had really changed the design of the iPhone in quite some time. Apple also introduced the rounded corners here. So this is a very rounded off phone where the glass basically folds over down onto the aluminum frame around the outside. And it's very comfortable to hold. This phone feels amazing. It's super light, incredibly thin. The iPhone 6 is actually the thinnest iPhone Apple has ever made. The 6 Plus was a little bit thicker, and the 6S and every iPhone after it was also just a tiny bit thicker as well. These were the first iPhones with a camera bump. So while it basically looks like nothing is there, at the time, this was the biggest bump you could ever find on an iPhone. And today, it looks comically small in comparison to what we have on the new iPhones. But this was the first time we had seen a camera bump on an iPhone. I think the reason is because the phones were so thin, there was just not the same amount of room that you could find on the older devices. Now, these did keep the same 8 megapixel lens found in the iPhone 4S, 5, and 5S. There were a few improvements, especially in low light. For the most part, this iPhone had essentially the same camera as the iPhone 5S. Now, if we head into settings, into the camera settings, we can see the ability to record 60 FPS video. This was a first for the iPhone here on the iPhone 6, and that meant that you could record 1080p at 60 FPS. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go ahead and switch over to the iPhone 6 Plus here, and we'll see how that looks. All right, here we are on the 6 Plus. I'd imagine this is gonna look pretty good. Not only is it 1080p 60 FPS, but this phone has optical image stabilization. So this was the first iPhone to feature that. The iPhone 6 actually does not have that. So the 6 Plus had this feature all by itself. The base level or the small size iPhone would not get this feature until the iPhone 7. So even the 6S skipped out on that. But how does this look? How does it sound? I know it's not on the tripod, but I think that optical image stabilization is gonna help it out just a little bit. The colors look good. Of course, it's 60 FPS. Unfortunately, not 4K resolution. So maybe you guys will be able to tell that difference there, but we'll go ahead and switch back here to my main setup. All right, there you guys got to see and hear how the iPhone 6 Plus records video and audio. It honestly looks super clean. I am very impressed. You really wouldn't know that this iPhone is 10 years old just at first glance. Granted, it does have some large bezels at the bottom and the top. It's got a single camera on the rear. Does have lightning connector, but I mean, so does the iPhone 14 Pro, so not a huge change there. We do have the headphone jack that was removed a couple years later with the iPhone 7, which we got the box for here, and there's no specs on that. That's interesting. Whatever, I digress. Anyway, these phones are fantastic. They really changed the game. I actually had a 6 Plus when it came out. I got a 64 gig white model, and this thing was awesome. I upgraded from an iPhone 5, so obviously the larger display was great. The battery life was dramatically improved, and this phone just felt super, super smooth. But unfortunately, that did not last long. While iOS 8 performs really, really well on here, and it's 60 FPS all the way through the menus and everything like that, once this thing got iOS 9 and every upgrade after that, this thing really slowed down. And I think the biggest reason for that is the 1 gigabyte of RAM. The dual core A8 CPU GPU combo in here is plenty powerful to run modern iOS versions, but that 1 gig of RAM really limits this device and prevents it from getting iOS updates. I recently did a video on the iPad mini 4th gen. It's got the same CPU, clocked a tiny bit faster, but it's got 2 gigs of RAM. And that thing got iOS 15. This iPhone would stop at iOS 12. So there's 3 years difference in software updates just from a single gigabyte of RAM missing on this chip. So I think Apple really did everyone a disservice by doing that. I imagine they had that planned out because they wanted the 6S to be a substantial internal upgrade, which it was. 1 gig of RAM here on the iPhone 6 and the 6 Plus is just not enough. And really iOS 8 was the only version that you could get by using that and not have the iPhone feel pretty slow and choppy. That said, this thing does look and feel amazing here. One thing to note is the differences here between iOS 8.0 and 8.4.1. So you can see the home screen apps are in slightly different places. We've got Game Center up here. I think that was removed over here on the iPhone 6 in the later versions. And then if we swipe here to the right, oh, Game Center's here, so Apple just moved it. And we do have the Apple Watch app here. So this is the very first version of that. The Apple Watch app is missing here on 8.0. So that was not included. Not sure what we're going to be able to pair here on this iPhone. This was when the Apple Watch Series 0, the very first generation, came out back in 2014 or I think it was 2015 when that came out. So unfortunately, I don't have one. And I certainly don't have one that's never been updated because I'd imagine watchOS 2, 3, and 4 would not be compatible here with iOS 8. So that's something I've never really gotten into is Apple Watch collecting. I think that would be incredibly difficult to find ones on their original versions of iOS. Are there any of you guys that collect Apple Watches for their versions of watchOS? Let me know down in the comments. I do think Apple Watches are cool and I do have a handful, but it's impossible to find ones that have never been updated. I mean, it's hard enough to find the phones and the iPads, but the watches, that's a whole nother level. I would be impressed if someone shows me an Apple Watch collection similar to this, where these things have never been updated. Now, real quick, I'm on the Wi-Fi here with the 6 Plus. I want to test out the App Store. Let's see if that is working. I do think it is. I'd imagine we're probably not going to be able to download most of these apps because iOS 8 is so old, but it does look like the App Store is working just fine. And it's really fluid and smooth. You guys can see just how nice the iOS 8 experience here is on the iPhone 6 Plus. I bet if we head into the iTunes store, it's going to be the same story. I would imagine that this is going to be smooth as well, and everything loads just like it should. Very nice to see. Let's test out Siri. What were the score of this week's NBA basketball games?
There are 28 NBA games between last Monday and today.
So you can see Siri is working just fine. She sounds a little bit different and a little monotone compared to what we have now, especially with Apple Intelligence, but it is displaying stuff as it should for the most part. I mean, it's not perfect, but this was Siri just a few years after coming out on the iPhone 4S. So there's a lot to be desired here on Siri, but I think Apple fixed that. Something else that's cool here is landscape home screen. This was available on both the iPhone 6 this was only available on the 6 Plus. So that larger display meant you could kind of have like an iPad view here and see more of the applications on the 6 Plus. You could not do that on the iPhone 6. Something else that's pretty unique that I don't know why Apple got rid of is the keyboard. Now, look at the keyboard here. Obviously, you've got the standard keys, but look at all these function buttons on the right and the left of the keyboard. You've got copy and paste, you've got bold font, you've got an undo button, you've got forward and back arrows. So if I type something here, I can literally use these to move between the text. I think that's super cool. We've got exclamation points, question marks, periods, commas. This is fantastic, and unfortunately, Apple removed it. I don't know what version that was, but it went away. You can see we do have something similar up here on the iPhone 6, but because of the screen size, there is just not enough room for all of the other features that we've got down here on the 6 Plus. Take a look here at some of the older emojis. They look quite a bit different now. I'm not sure how well that's going to show up on camera. I bet if I do like that, you guys can see it. But there really weren't that many. And I actually like the way Apple has this set up better. Unfortunately, I don't think the iOS 8.1 update did anyone any favors. The emojis are now much larger, and I find it harder to use. I don't know if you guys have experienced that or not. Oh, hey there, time out for a sec. It's me from the future. I just discovered something really neat here on the 6 Plus. So we talked about the iPhone being able to do landscape mode here, or at least the 6 Plus can do that inside of settings on the home screen or whatever. Did you know that you can turn it upside down? Look at that. The home button's at the top, camera's down here at the bottom, and the iPhone is still usable. I had no idea you could do this on the iPhone 6 Plus. This is actually wild. I wonder if literally everything lets you do this. Okay, music does not work. What about Safari? Safari doesn't work. Is this some sort of glitch on 8.0? Because now our wallpaper's upside down. And now it's like all zoomed in funny ways. I don't know what's going on. I mean, it works like every time I do it. I can't imagine that this wasn't how it was supposed to be. Just kind of weird. I never knew you could do that on the 6 Plus. All right, back to the regular scheduled program. Hope you guys enjoyed that little fun feature there, because that is pretty cool. So it's pretty cool to see some of the older quirks and features on these software versions like 8.1, 8.0, especially there with the keyboard. Pretty neat to see some of that stuff. Now, real quick before we go, we gotta check out these iOS 8 wallpapers. There are some of my favorites here. iOS 7 was great, and iOS 8 has some really cool ones as well. Starting down here at the bottom, we've got a lot of the classics. These were introduced in iOS 7, a lot of these. I think this one's gonna suit the iPhone 6 really well. And what are we gonna do here for the 6 Plus? Maybe we'll go with this white one. That's a little bright. How about this? I know this was an iOS 6 wallpaper, but I think it looks really nice here on the iPhone 6 Plus running iOS 8. Kind of hard to focus here with the camera, but all right, we went with something a little different there. Don't think we've ever picked that one before. So there we go. Hope you guys have enjoyed this as much as I have. It's been super cool to unbox both of these iPhones, and honestly incredible to get an 8.0 128GB iPhone 6 Plus. That is just unbelievable to me. Very, very awesome device to have. Let me know down in the comments if you enjoyed the unboxing here where I did more than one phone or device. Typically I just do one at a time, but I figured these kind of go together, so why not open them and talk about them at the same time? Okay, that's gonna do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in another one of my videos.